we have two public hearings. We're going to take the second public hearing first so that the speaker who wanted to be for the first public hearing has an extra opportunity to get here. The first one that we're taking up is agenda item 7.5. And this is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the county government's FY20 operating budget for the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation non-departmental account, NDA, support for COVID-19 response in the amount of $1,250,000 for telework assistance program. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. Individuals will be alerted as they approach their 2 minutes and may be disconnected. Also, there may be technical glitches during the public hearing that may need to be addressed by our staff. So thanks in advance, for your patience. We do have one speaker, and action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, would you like to conduct the public hearing, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We do have one speaker for this public hearing, and that is Marilyn Balcombe.
Good afternoon, Council President Katz and County Council members. My name is Marilyn Balcombe, President and CEO of the Gaithersburg Germantown Chamber of Commerce. My chamber, along with the Greater Silver Spring and the Greater Bethesda Chambers, support the expansion of the Telework Assistance Program. While the initial public health emergency grant program included the $2,500 telework grant, the stringent eligibility requirements have been difficult to meet. The new Telework Assistance Program is providing much needed support to small businesses. We appreciate the quick implementation of the program and thank MCEDC for their efforts in making the application process easy to navigate. A few weeks ago, my colleagues and I shared our overwhelming support for this program and the great need for this assistance. However, without additional funding, the funds could very well be depleted within the first week of the program. There have been a number of financial support packages available to businesses. Unfortunately, only a small fraction of businesses were able to receive assistance due to the overwhelming demand. It's heartbreaking to hear from our small businesses who have not been able to tap support funds. The need for financial support continues for our small businesses. I encourage you to please support the expansion of the Telework Assistance Program. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other speakers. Is that correct, Ms. Kennedy?
That's correct, sir.
Thank you. This public hearing is now closed. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to colleagues. I am very pleased that we are adding funding to this program. You heard from Ms. Balcombe. You've also received testimony from the Silver Spring Chamber that they are in strong support of this, along with a lot of our other business partners. I personally wanted to thank the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation that stepped up very quickly, as you recall, and stepped in to administer this program. It has been really successful so far, not surprisingly for all of us. It has met a need, some of the tremendous need in the community. We recognized then and talked about how we would likely need to add more funding. There was an interest in making sure that the application date was pushed forward into the future in order to accommodate more businesses and allow for more people to be able to access the program. This helps to reflect that as well. And the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, in setting up the program, has set up a really creative process to get the funds out quickly and to fulfill that clear direction from this council, but also to make sure that there is some fairness to the way that the program comes out, so that it's not necessarily first come, first serve. And so it's been a lottery system. The first week has just been completed, far more than the initial $250,000 that we appropriated in the initial tranche of this program. And so this will allow them to continue the lotteries that are done at random. Anybody who has applied over the course of the week has access to be able to be randomly selected if they are pre-approved based on the criteria that we have set forth. In addition to that, as many of you know, we continue to push for more real-time reporting on this. The Economic Development Corporation had committed to that in the initial appropriation, and we have added weekly reporting to this appropriation. It's something that they were already doing, but we have memorialized it. There were already reporting requirements in the initial on June 1st, but this will add significant transparency and accountability of what was already committed and memorialize that as part of it. The Economic Development Corporation is on the line, I believe, to answer any specific questions, but this is adding adding funding to a program that is working. This is reflecting the fact that our businesses, as we know, need help. Our nonprofits, as we know, need support. And this is a small token, a modest amount of support to allow them to move to teleworking as part of the social distancing requirements that are helping keep us safe and are continuing, as we know, in Montgomery County until we can beat this public health epidemic.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Ms. Balcom and Ms. Redeker, who I know in absentia submitted testimony. Will be happy to support this. If MCEDC, I don't know if Ben Wu or Mr. Tompkins are on, I would like to ask a question for the benefit of myself and my colleagues, but also the public, on an update, brief update on the implementation thus far, how many people have received these awards, and anything you can give me by way of geographic breakdown and types of businesses that have applied. A summary of that briefly would be great.
Mr. Wu?
Thank you, Council President. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the Council for the confidence that they've shown in the EDC. The EDC is happy to step up and to support the Council, as well as with the county executive in helping to support the Telework Assistance Fund. I also want to commend our Executive Vice President, Bill Tompkins, for his leadership in helping to steer the EDC staff towards this effort. We have had a number of applications, and we conducted the first lottery yesterday. And so I'd like to turn it over to Bill to be able to provide some of the numbers that we've seen, to be able to give the Council a snapshot of the applications that have come in, and also for the first lottery, the number of people who will be receiving telework assistance funding.
Okay, thank you, Bill. But 1 second, there is some question when I close the public hearing. I don't want there to be any question. The public hearing is now closed. Bill, please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon. We so far have had 418 applications requesting $868,000 through the first period. 382 of those were processed. 296 were approved before the lottery, totaling $552,000. Therefore, we had to do the lottery last night. And of those 296 that were pre-approved, 119 made the lottery, taking us up to $250,000. So we're doing a final check and audit on those applications today. And if all goes well, we will start notifying people tomorrow into one of three categories. One, that they were approved and we'll start processing the payments. Two, they were approved but did not make the lottery and will roll into next week, assuming we have additional funds. Or three, they were not approved. In terms of the geographic locations and types of companies, Councilmember Jawando, we have all that information. We just haven't sorted it. I mean, we glanced at it and figured we would supply that on June the 1st. It's from all over the county, mostly small businesses, lots of LLCs, but we really haven't done that type of analysis. Our objective was to make sure they were legitimate, had real, the right types of receipts, and that we could process as many as possible. So we're pretty much up to speed. We're not behind, but you will have the sort of what I call the demographic breakdown. Either probably not tomorrow, but definitely with the June 1st report.
Okay, and I think that'll be important to see, especially as we head in. I suspect we're going to approve this additional funding, and that's some information we want to be tracking to know, who's getting it and where it's going and the types of businesses. And are you all asking, I can't remember on the application if it's a woman-owned minority
Yes.
business. So
Yes.
that we'll be able to sort by that as well.
By women-owned or minority, by industry, by zip code, and we are going to translate that into the names of those zip codes. So the answer is yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I think that'll be helpful. And then as far as the June 1st reporting, how quickly do you expect to move from money being appropriated to the next lottery? What's your timeline there?
You mean if you approve it today?
Correct.
We'll just continue on and do the lottery next Wednesday as originally planned and follow the same process. They'll be double checked on Thursday and just go into our billing system on Friday.
So I would ask then, I agree we need to get it out quickly. If you all could prioritize before June 1st, sending the breakdown of the
Sure.
information, that would be helpful.
Okay, well, it's just a sorting mechanism. We'll do it in the next couple of days.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your work on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Wu and Mr. Tompkins, for your speedy work here. I associate myself with all the questions that Mr. Jawando just asked. Mr. Tompkins, your report out was too quick for me to write some of the numbers down, but the only data point, because I look forward to seeing the report that you produced. What was the average grant amount that you dispersed?
Okay, I'm going to give you two numbers. The average grant amount of all applications we approved was $1,865. When I look at the 119 that made the lottery, it was about $2,100.
Okay. And then I know this is hard without some of the information in front of you, but what were some of the things that people were requesting reimbursement for? Were they cameras, computers, or other types of things?
All of the above. Lots of computers, lots of printers, cables, iPhones, or let's say smartphones. Those were the most popular items.
People were asking for smartphones.
Oh, yeah. And we had a long debate. We've looked at what the county has done. We looked at other programs across the country. And depending on how they asked for them, they are an approvable expense.
Okay. I look forward to the report. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson, would you like to make a motion?
I would, with appreciation both for Mr. Wu and Mr. Tompkins for the great work that they have done in collaboration with us. I'd like to move approval of this additional special appropriation for the teleworking assistance program for $1.25 million.
And Mr. President, if I could add before the motion that the EDC would also like to recognize or acknowledge the support and assistance from the county executive, especially the finance team, because being able to cross-check with the FEG and also being able to share some of their lessons learned and best practices was also very helpful for the EDC in setting up the Telework Assistance Fund.
Thank you, and thank you for all that you're doing. And I saw that Councilmember Reamer had his two fingers up. It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand, excuse me. And that carries, I believe, unanimous. It's unanimous. Okay. Next, we're going to go back to number 7, which, we'll find out if that person is here. This is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the county government's FY20 operating budget for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs COVID-19 response in the amount of $4,393,899 for Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus Response, CDBG-CV, and Emergency Solutions Grants, COVID-19, Housing and Urban Development's Office of Community Planning and Development, ESG-CV, HUD-CPD funding. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing, and I understand we do have a speaker. Is the speaker here, Ms. Kennedy?
No, they are not here.
Okay, so that means this hearing is now closed. Is there, this is an action item as well. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We now, just to follow a perfect schedule how we're doing things, we're going to number 5 and then go to number 4. So we're now at number 5, which is the expedited bill 2220, the position creation and position alteration, Director of Strategic Partnerships, and Director of Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission. And I believe that is Councilmember Navarro, who I always should go to first because she has all of these, I think, except for the one I have next. Okay, go ahead, please.
Let's go. So Bill 22-20, Administration Position, Creation and Position Alteration, Strategic Partnerships and Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission. This is sponsored by our Council President at the request of the County Executive. This was introduced on April 14th, 2020. We did have a public hearing on May 5th, and action is scheduled for May 19th. This bill, it's an expedited bill. It creates a non-merit appointed position of a Director of Strategic Partnerships, and it eliminates the requirement that the position of Director of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission be filled by a non-merit appointee. The executive proposes that the current duties of the CJCC Director be assumed by an individual designated by the Chief Administrative Officer. The new Director of Strategic Partnerships would act as a liaison to the County Council, develop executive positions and testimony on council matters, coordinate and review executive regulations, and perform special ad hoc policy assignments, among other duties. On May 5th, we had a public hearing, and Mr. Dale Tibbetts, on behalf of the county executive, was the lone speaker. He indicated that the CJCC Director position does not require an entire FTE, and that the executive believes that a new position is not being created, just repurposing an existing role to better fit new objectives. I think that, as we will probably hear from our council staff, there are obviously some concerns of how this would fit with our budget framework approach of continuity of operations, and whether this is considered indeed repurposing a position or actually creating a new position. We also have to talk about the non-merit versus merit issue, which I think is very important. And we do have actually a council staff recommendation that says that given current budget limitations, the council might wish to amend the bill to eliminate the creation of the partnerships director, but to retain provisions of the bill that amend the CJCC director position. So that is just an overview, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Wellens to continue or add anything else, and also so that we can engage in a conversation about the bill.
Great. Thank you, Chair Navarro. Thank you, Mr. President and council members. I think that Councilwoman Navarro described the bill very thoroughly. So I'll just touch upon the issues that have been raised in the staff packet. As Ms. Navarro said, one issue is considering the bill in terms of continuity of services. There is a new position created, a new non-merit position created by the bill in the executive branch. And the idea is that this new position, in a sense, is replacing the CJCC director, who would no longer, that would no longer be a separate position under statute. Those duties would be assumed by other staff as directed by the CAO. So it's kind of exchanging one position for the other, but I think it's important to note that the CJCC director, according to the executive branch, those duties don't require a full-time position. With that said, so we're creating a new position, but not, and also the CJCC position isn't currently filled. On the other hand, the executive branch has pointed out that that the duties that would be performed by the new position, also the duties of the CJCC director, are currently spread across multiple individuals who have many functions they're required to perform. And the new strategic partnership director would be sort of a main point of contact for the county council, and would have the role of really facilitating communications between the branches of government. I believe that we have Ms. Sturgis and also Ms. Kassiri available on the line to answer council member questions. But again, just to note that continuity of services is an issue you may want to consider. And then, of course, the other issue, as Chair Navarro mentioned, was that we're creating a new non-merit position. The Director of Strategic Partnerships would be appointed by the executive, of course, and confirmed by the County Council. And the CJCC Director would no longer be a non-merit employee. Again, the CJCC Directors, that role is not currently filled, and those duties are being performed elsewhere right now. I'm happy to try to answer any questions, and as I mentioned, the executive branch is available for questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro, was there anything else?
Nothing else. I think it would be good to hear from the administration. Obviously, just to remind colleagues, at least with the previous administration, we had a similar arrangement, except that we didn't have a particular person that was coordinating this. There were assistants to the executive that had particular portfolios that were, liaisons to the council. And I know I personally can say that I really appreciated that because you always knew who you could contact and who had a particular portfolio. And their response was very, prompt. I think that we were very well served by having that, but there wasn't one person or one position that was, assigned to do all this, because obviously we have a very broad set of issues and portfolio to address. So this is different than obviously the way we have operated in the past. But just, just putting that out there as background information. I do see we have Ms. Kassiri and Ms. Sturgis. So if they'd like to add some, we'd like to make some comments, and then we can turn it back to you, Mr. President, to facilitate the conversation with my colleagues.
Good evening. Just have one more. Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Just one comment that we did have, actually, Bonnie Kirkland was the council liaison. I would say maybe 60% of her job was being elite between council and executive branch. And then the remaining 40% of her job was like the other remaining 3 ACALs. Just that one correction.
No, I do appreciate that, and I was thinking about Bonnie the whole entire time. She carried, the bulk of the task, but there were also other particular assistants that have particular portfolios that we were able to liaison with directly. But she obviously was somebody that was, really great, and so that's why creating another position here would be interesting to understand why that is necessary when there was already something already established in that respect. I just wanted to add a little bit of that background.
Okay. Ms. Sturgis, Ms. Sturgis, did you want to add anything?
Hi, good afternoon, council members. Great to see everyone. No, I don't have anything else to add. I think that Councilmember Navarro has summed it up adequately. So I stand available, ready to answer any questions.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Navarro? No? Or we'll hear from Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, and thank you to the GO chair for very robust and comprehensive overview of this. I think for me, we've heard a lot about the county executive's interest in restructuring government. Here we've identified a position that's not necessary, that the administration has, I think, rightfully concluded is not needed for a separate position, and that is vacant. And rather than eliminating the position, which would be one small measure and a very large government to demonstrate the first step towards a serious restructuring. We're repurposing the position to, as far as I can tell, replace the role that is already being filled currently by a special assistant, in terms of the actual functions of the role as it has been described to us, and it's still not entirely clear to me how they would differ. That's disappointing to me, and I think that it's not certainly. I would be disappointed to me in a normal circumstance. I think in this council's efforts for a continuity of services budget, as has been noted by the staff report, it is directly contradictory to those efforts. I would hope that we would not move forward with adding this position at this time, but I think that the staff report by Ms. Wellens was really thoughtful in terms of adopting the aspects of this bill that allow for the CJCC changes to be made so that Ms. Sturgis can take some of those roles, which, as the administration has indicated, do not require anywhere close to a full-time position. But I think in the moment that we're in, with all the difficult decisions that we have made to repurpose a vacant, unnecessary role in county government to create as far as I can tell, a superfluous position in county government would be a very troubling action and a very difficult one to reconcile with all of the other very important, very significant budgetary decisions that we have already made from this budget cycle, and which are just the tip of the iceberg of what we will ultimately have to make based on the revenue and fiscal picture and the economic challenges that we will face moving forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Rayner.
Thanks. I concur with the comments and the questions from my colleagues. I don't fully understand the need to create a new position. It seems like there are a number of people who are performing this function presently. So, in the past, there were ACAOs who were also the liaison to the county council. And, that was helpful because they were senior people who had a lot of clout, on the second floor. And it was less confusion in the matrix. So I'm a little worried about, adding in another sort of position where that fits in the plan, and then who that means that the council is talking to, and so on. It just seems a little confusing. I do have some concerns about this as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. If Ms. Kassiri or Ms. Sturgis, whoever would like to, or both, I just want to understand why you think this is a necessary position and why you don't count it as a new position. If you could address both of those. Yeah.
Thank you. As far as I think Councilmember Friedson comments about CJCC not being, actually CJCC is an important function. Frankly, when the retirement happened and that person moved on, Mike Subin used to be the executive director for CJCC. So CJCC is a very critical function. So what we decided to do to take those responsibilities and assign it to an ACAO and the other duties that Mike Subin had, and there are many of them. For example, disruptive behavior orders, which we reassigned to county attorney's office. So there were few other things that we assigned to the special assistants to county executive. And then we decided to create a position because we really do see county executive believes this position is a key for a clear and open communication with county council, for timely follow-throughs, for timely coordination of the legislative matters or anything that any council member needs. So we realize that
so this will be broader than communication based on the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission. It's a broader role than that.
Yes, this new position will be purely focused on the needs or any question, communication county council needs from executive branch, including ongoing legislative packages or legislative matters, either from executive sides or the council sides, to be able to coordinate that, to stay on top of everything, and more importantly, clearly understand what each council member's needs, issues are with any subject that is either ongoing or is a hot issue, to be able to help that and facilitate that. So we identified the need, and therefore we decided to divide the responsibility of the previous CJCC to elsewhere and free up this position to serve that role. And county executive strongly believes this is going to bring a lot of value to our relationship to county council and the communication. So
the role of the CJCG liaison will be split between who?
It's not, okay, most CJCC is actually, the entire responsibility is going to be given to Carolyn Sturgis, one of our ACAOs, and there were other roles and responsibilities. For example, the main one was actually destructive behavior order appeals, which anytime all throughout the government used to come back to Mike Subin to hear it. That is reassigned to county attorney. Abandonments hearing reassigned to DOT. Residential parking permit areas that's reassigned to DOT. And by the way, these used to be handled by these other entities. Under previous administration, we brought them all and put them under this position.
So the roles that Mike Subin used to fulfill are being split between Caroline and other people, and yes. Then the role, the FTE that he had will be used for this liaison purpose to the council. What does that mean does that mean Mr. Tibbetts will be in a different role?
So Mr. Tibbetts actually currently, this was a new model under new county executive. He already handles, by the way, boards and committees and commission, that whole process. That is under his portfolio. In addition, this was actually from the beginning, in addition to being liaison with county council, handles many projects, high priority project for county executive. So he already had a full plate, and we see that as a typical special assistant to county executive.
Okay, sure.
What he's doing is a better fit that position. So
Got it. Well, you're not going to have any argument from any of us. I think that there's need for more communication and better liaison relationships. So we're going to agree with you on that. My question to council staff, to Ms. Wellens, based on that interpretation, so that does sound like they're just repurposing an old FTE. Is that your interpretation of this as well?
You could certainly look at it that way. I guess I was struck by the fact that according to the materials that the executive sent, again, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but basically the CJCC director, according to the executive, fulfilling those duties is not a full-time endeavor, and that position is currently vacant. Therefore, so
it wasn't a full-time FTE.
Right. Under statute, well, it was when it was filled, and under statute, it is a non-merit position. So under this bill, it would be converted to a merit position that could be filled, or it could be filled by anyone designated by the CAO. So it's replacing what could be, it's replacing part-time duty. I guess if you're looking at it not exactly as FTEs, but in terms of what their functions are doing, you're replacing kind of a part-time duties with full-time duties.
But Mike Subin was the previous director being paid as a full-time employee?
Yes, but and actually, see, I think Christine is correct. CJCC was half of his job, but he has other duties that now I just explained, we reassigned to others. So
Right.
CJCC was not 100% of his job. He had other duties, which we have reassigned to either special assistants, county attorney, or other departments. So in that sense, I agree. CJCC was half of his job. If you remember, I don't know if initially he had only, this was a part-time job. It became a full-time job when we brought all the hearings under this position. So that's how it became a full-time.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna stop because I think colleagues, but that was helpful for me because I wasn't understanding that interplay. I agree we need a liaison. If this is swapping Mike Subin's old position to change that, and you're getting rid of the responsibilities, adding something else to poor Caroline's plate, Ms. Sturgis's plate, and among other things, fine. I think that's reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I also wanted to clarify that, I mean, as far as I remember, for example, Ms. Kirkland, that was not her only job. I remember Ms. Nurmi would also liaison with the executive, with the council on certain policy areas. That wasn't her only job. Ms. Kasiri, you would come and liaison with us. That was not your only job. And so I think that, you know, what I'm trying to wrap my head around in this particular moment is that we are dealing with a particular framework for our budget. And I know that we also did pass a bill where we created assistant ACAOs for the executive. So there is a nice complement of people that could very well, you know, under the previous framework, provide the kind of prompt, you know, what I consider to be, and I have to say that I've remarked to my staff that I miss that other framework, because I knew for a fact that if something came up, my staff could call Bonnie or could call, you know, Fariba, could call Joy for those specific areas that they covered. And we knew we had a certain consistent, reliable response. You know, sometimes it was great news, sometimes it wasn't, but we knew that that was actually, you know, very solid. And so I don't particularly feel that even if we were to move forward with something like this, that would create the same kind of support, because it's just one person funneling all of this. So I just wanted to kind of, you know, give that other context as chair of GO in terms of, especially in this moment in time, how that kind of setting, that kind of framework in the past really helped, really worked. And perhaps that's what we should be asking the executive to explore versus, you know, repurposing, recreating, creating, you know, really what it amounts to an imposition during this moment of continuity of services.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear that I actually am the vice chair of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission this year. And of course, I've seen Mike Subin when he was the person in charge of that, and Ms. Sturgis as well during those meetings. And I do know that Mike Subin did, to Ms. Kasari's point, I did know Mike Subin did many other things other than Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission. He was Veterans Affairs and many other items as well. Councilmember Albernaz.
Thank you, and want to add to the chorus that I really miss Bonnie Kirkland a lot. She was just and continues to be outstanding. And I do want to provide a little bit more context in terms of her role. So I, as a former department head, would often consult with Bonnie if I had a question or an issue or something related to the council that went beyond just the Fed committee, as an example. And so Bonnie was a great connector of dots within the administration and within the departments that proved to be a very valuable tool, because as you guys know, there's this awkwardness of the budget process and wanting to defend the budget of the county executive while also defending the needs of your respective departments. And the two are congruent and obviously connected, But there's a dance that has to happen sometimes, and I don't know how else to say it. And Bonnie was outstanding in helping you think through and troubleshoot and problem solve issues so that it eliminated conflict that would arise later downstream and frustrate council members. And so I often leaned on her, and I think had a very good relationship with the previous councils as a former department head, in part because I over communicated in many instances, and she helped facilitate that. And so I don't know who is performing that role within this administration or how that is working, but I know what we currently have is not working. And I know that it has created a great source of frustration in a number of areas and slowed us down in areas where we needed to not be slowed down. And so I appreciate and respect the thought being given here to an acknowledgement that things do need to be improved, and also respect that this is a strategy that's being presented to improve them. But I am concerned within this environment, and I think the fact that I believe this is cost neutral. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the fact that this is cost neutral is I think important, but I sincerely hope that this helps address what has been a problem, and I think part of the issue also is, and I'm just going to be candid, we have some immensely talented people that have been brought into this administration, immensely talented, but the learning curve has included getting to know the county and getting to know the departments and getting to know the key stakeholders. And to the credit of these remarkable professionals, they are learning quicker than I ever could have if I were in their position, but that has created a learning curve. And so if we do move forward with this, I think it is critically important that this person be very familiar with Montgomery County and our systems, so that there is no learning curve at all, because we are in the middle of a crisis, as we all know, and it is only, as we are seeing minute by minute, getting worse. And so because this is cost neutral, this is something I can support, but only if this position is targeted to somebody who understands our county, has relationships with us right now, and can build off of those fairly quickly, because I know that unique role that Bonnie played, and that it seems to me, I don't know who's playing that role right now within the administration.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Just quickly, I think I heard earlier, Ms. Kasiri, is this? I thought you referenced this as a new position when Councilmember Jawando was talking about the relationship between the CJCC and this new role. And that's my understanding, that the recognition is that there is not a need for a separate position to oversee the funds that Mr. Subin was playing, that those would be spread out and diffused over multiple roles, including Ms. Sturgis, who's ably taking that over. And that this is a new position being created for these purposes. Is that accurate? Yeah, we are repurposing CJCC to this. I guess if you can define a new position, it's going to have a new PD position description, so it is different than what's Michael's. I think in the world of questioning, maybe county attorney or someone else can chime in. For these questioning non-merit position, what it is, we just change the position description, and county council either approves or disapproves, and we move on. So it is a position, in a non-merit position, we are repurposing the past job description to something new. Yes, it's staying within Office of the County Executive. Okay, and then how many people in the executive branch are responsible as part or all of their role for land use? Land use. So we have GGS folks. No, I mean specifically for land use policy issues. We have people who come over from the executive branch to weigh in on land use policy issues from the executive branch. I'm just curious. In my mind, I count two, Ms. Isley and Ms. Wellington. But I was just wondering if there's anybody else in the
That's
in the
true.
executive
I
branch.
think Pete Fosselman would be, it's not the land use. He's actually.
That's
yeah,
more
right.
implementation. Yeah, generally,
you're
I
right,
think
you're
that
right. There are
the
two.
council handles the land use policy exclusively, and the executive branch helps to implement the master plans as a result of.
Yes. So you're
those
correct.
policies.
Two people. Those are the two individuals. You're correct.
So I think that there are two people that, the land use policy is exclusively the domain of the county council. That's two people who liaise with the county council already. I think that there are different approaches. I think you've heard before, I think we all recognize that there's a problem. I personally appreciate that after 18 months, there's an acknowledgement that there is a problem that I think we all are committed to working together on. I just don't think, particularly at this moment, but really at any time, that this is the right solution to address that problem. And I don't think I can support adding a new position as part of our continuity of services framework.
Could I add, this is Glenn Orland. Mr. Friedson, the executive branch is responsible for providing fiscal impact statements on master plans, and OMB does that, reaching out to each of the departments. Also, when the executive comments on master plans, Greg Osson from DGS, who's deputy director, coordinates that. So to that degree, the executive branch is involved a bit in land use issues, but not continuously, not directly.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think technical analysis and providing the views of the county executive from the DGS perspective, since there are, property owner and landlord and realtor, so to speak. But I was more specifically focused on policy analysts in the executive branch. So I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'll come right out and say I'm torn on this one because since the beginning of all of our terms, there has been a disconnect, right, in communication, quite frankly. And we've been working through it. And the fact is, it's not for lack of staff that we're here. Everybody who's on this screen, I see all of you regularly. I see a lot of people who aren't on this screen, who might be on this call, who might be following it on YouTube, or who might just be busy working and not following our proceedings today. And one of the phrases that was used in trying to better understand this position was that it's cost neutral. We just had a really tough day yesterday talking about our budget. I'm not quite sure there is anything that's cost neutral anymore, at least in terms of the budget moving forward. We made some really tough decisions, and if there's a vacant position right now and we are trying to fill it, that's not cost neutral. You can go back to the video and hear all of us talk about how important every single penny is in this budget and how much need there is and how much we want to support our current workers who aren't vacant, who are doing the work every single day, putting themselves on the front lines. And so I'm just trying to figure out if we need to hire another person to do a job that 10 people are currently doing. So I'm torn. I don't want to support this, quite frankly, because I'd rather that money go towards where it's really needed. And if this is about a lack of communication or changing the structure within the second floor or somewhere else, well, then let's do that. Because we've been doing this, we've had this relationship between this executive and this council for 15, 16 months. And I'm not quite sure that throwing one more job into the mix is going to fix things. So I'm going to keep listening to this conversation, but I've put it all out there as to where I am.
Thank you. Councilmember Overnoz.
Thanks. So I think in processing this, Councilmember Glass just framed it pretty beautifully. And I think that there's an opportunity here for us as we've gone through the pandemic in particular, and as an example, the weekly briefings that we're having together, where we're discussing issues in real time which I think has been really beneficial. And so in some ways, when you're in crisis like this, it's an opportunity to improve that infrastructure. And I think we have that opportunity here. And so I think in light of all of the other pieces that are out there and all of the very difficult decisions that have had to be made, I think that with the current staff complement, and I'd like to try and help with this if that's helpful at all, but to figure out a better way for us to be able to connect those dots. And of course, as Councilmember Navarro said, Joy Nurmi is still on my team. And so she and I are intimately familiar with how it used to work. And we're not saying that was perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But I think within the existing framework, we could see improvement, as we have, I think, in the last few weeks, in the last several weeks. And so for those reasons, I'd like to give that a try before we add, another position in light of everything that was just said, which I think is a very good point. So that is where I'm at now, based on this discussion, and I will continue to do everything I can, as all of us do, to work with the executive branch so that, because if the county executive succeeds, we all succeed. And we want to make sure that this administration has the resources and the tools and the communication so that we are working collectively for the good of our community. And so I want to continue to be in that role. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. And I couldn't agree more with everything that my colleagues have said. So I'll just say amen to all of it. I agree. I don't feel as though this is the right time, nor the urgency is there. Certainly at some point later, we might be able to have this discussion and talk about what that new structure is, a la what Councilmember Albornoz said. And I think that's the best way for us to proceed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And as we know, we're not voting on this today anyhow. Councilmember Navarro, did you have anything else to add?
Just to say, I know we're going to be voting on this next week, I believe. Just to say that, wrapping up with what I have heard, the reality is that we have had to go through a very difficult budget process. And I know I have had to really restrain myself to not fight for additional positions in many of our departments, especially those that are dealing with safety net issues, because I understand what we are dealing with. And I want to acknowledge that I know this was proposed before the pandemic hit, so I do want to acknowledge that. Yeah. But I myself don't feel comfortable, again, since I had to practice restraint in other areas to necessarily, I don't feel comfortable supporting, this at this moment in time, but do agree that we can continue to work together to see what is the best way for us to liaison and to provide that kind of continuity. So that's where I will be also next week. Thank you.
Thank you. This is tentatively scheduled for next week, May the 19th, is for an action item. The next item that we're going to is number 4, which is Bill 2120, the Office of Animal Services established. That is under the Public Safety Committee, and I guess the key points on this are, number 1, that we did hold a work session on May 5th on it, and we tentatively approved the budget for this Office of Animal Services. We also the Bill 2120 would implement decisions that are which we've already approved, tentatively approved, and then that if we do this, that it's been suggested by our staff that we change the effective date to be July 1st, 2020. And with that, I'm going to ask Ms. Myhill if she has anything in addition to say.
The only other thing that I would say, Mr. President, is that if you support the bill, you would want to make it an expedited bill so that it can take effect on July 1st. The other thing that I will tell you is that Chief Jones as well as Director Koenig are also on the call if there are any questions for them.
Thank you very much. Chief Jones, did you have anything to
add? Good afternoon, Council President Katz and the council members. No, I don't have anything to add other than to be supportive of the county executive's position on the separation of this as a separate division. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Koenig, who is the department head, are you, or will be, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Council President Katz and the council members. We're actually pretty excited about this transition. While we have Chief Jones on there, I want to say that any concern regarding continuity of operation, that the police department has not only been supportive of this decision, but his executive and professional staff have all been working diligently with us to make sure that any transition issues that need to be resolved, that we're resolving them. We have agreements that we're working on now to make sure that we may be leaving the department, but our connectivity to that department and the work that we're doing is going to continue, and I'm excited about that relationship. And I can't thank Chief Jones enough for all the support of him and his people while we've been going through this.
Thank you very much. I see no speakers on this. I am supportive of it as well. I think that it's something that it makes sense to do it this way, and I'm appreciative of that. However, having said that, we're not voting today on this either. This will also be voted on. It's tentatively scheduled for next Tuesday, May 19th. Thank you very much. We are moving on. Thanks. The next item that we have is we're going to go back now to our regular agenda, and that's on item number 8, and that is the capital budget wrap-up and CIP reconciliation. And I'm going to ask Mr. Lipchenko and Dr. Orland to lead that off, please.
Right, and yeah, as you mentioned, Dr. Orland is on the call here with us. I'm going to be referring to the staff report extensively because it has a lot of information in it, and I think the best thing to do is just sort of go through it so everyone can absorb that, and then we can deal with questions and comments after that, especially questions that aren't answered once we get through this. The first part of the cover sheet really is a summary of where we were last week when we provided a status update to the council. And there's a gap chart shown here. And I'm just going to reiterate a couple key points to that. First, there was a 6-year gap based on our latest assumptions of about $98 million, which is significant, certainly. But even more problematic was the fact that the gap was concentrated in the first 4 years of this chart and totaled about $274 million. So right away, that meant we were going to have to do some significant expenditure reductions or deferrals to push things out. And the reason for the gap is obviously expenditures that were proposed or straw voted in by the council, but also we did have a write-down in recordation tax revenue, both on the school side and on the premium side, especially in the first year of the CIP, FY21. So that was a big hit. And so that's just one more element that was causing us to have to move things out. Also assumed in these numbers is the additional state aid that we're assuming from the Build to Learn Act. There's about $80 million assumed in these years, but most of that money is in the last few years of the CIP. So once again, it doesn't necessarily help with those tough early years, but it does provide some additional space in those later years. But with that said, there are many uncertainties with this aid. Obviously, we just had the governor veto of Kerwin last week. But apart from that, just assuming that the bill survives as legislated, we still have issues about funding, given the state's fiscal situation and the timing of that. And then also more locally, we have issues about our project eligibility and our local match that would be required, and we're working on that to try to improve that over time. But those are uncertainties as well. So we felt, given that, one major element of this reconciliation was to make sure we provided sufficient set-asides to give us flexibility in the next year or two, given there could be a lot of change. You're going to see a lot of change on the operating budget, and we very well may see change on the capital side as well. So the set-asides are important here too. And the reconciliation, just as a preliminary note, provides about $150 million in a 6-year set-aside over time, and we can go into those numbers later. But that's a key element of this. And finally, just once we get through this portion of the reconciliation, council staff did draft as part of the next item options the council could choose if it wants to reduce PAYGO in FY21. And the purpose of this would be to provide additional resources for the operating budget. So that's a separate, we treated it as a separate part of this reconciliation. You do the reconciliation first and then decide what you want to do with the FY21 PAYGO, and that becomes a separate exercise.
Mr. Council President, when I click on the agenda, I don't get this packet on the website. Am I missing something?
You have to, go ahead.
I believe it was supposed to be made available as soon as this meeting started.
Well,
it's probably going to be up.
I just talked with staff. They're actually in the midst of putting it up right at the moment.
So it's a little, there's a tremendous interest here. So I think we might want to pause for 10 minutes or something until everyone who is following this discussion has a chance to pull up the memo.
All right, well then I'll tell you what we'll do. We could go, well, I guess we should pause because this is going to follow order.
Yeah, I'm working through the packet, so if
I know
council,
you are, but someone is at home,
right.
Keith, can't.
Well, that's what I mean. If we want to have the packet available for folks, that would make sense since we're walking through it.
I mean, 8A has been available, so I suppose you could do that while we wait. But
well, 8A though is dependent on
based on
A.
Yeah. A. All right, so let's take. How long will it take to put this packet up?
I expect it to be up already, so it should be momentarily.
Okay. Does anybody know from staff that actually is putting it up how long it will take? Let's take a 10-minute recess. Okay, so that means that we'll be coming back at 2:50. At 2:50. Thank you.
It was online within 30 seconds of.
Right. I have 250. Michelle, are we ready to start again? Okay. It is now 2:50. We are back from recess, and we left off, I guess, that with Keith, if you would go. I think you were speaking when we left off.
Yeah, I was just sort of finishing up the overview. I had mentioned the $98 million 6-year gap and the $274 million 4-year gap, and concerns regarding that. We also talked about the second part of this, which would be discussion about potential pay-go reductions in 21. So now I'm just moving on past that. Because of the significant 4-year gap, one area we looked at as one way to help solve some of these issues, and we'll get into those issues in a minute, was to look at the bond level assumptions in the out years of the CIP. You'll recall that the spending affordability process sets the limits for the first 2 years of the CIP and also the 6 years. However, there is some flexibility within those other years, and in fact, what staff is suggesting here in this reconciliation package is to actually increase the bond level in FY23 by $10 million and decrease the bond level in FY26 by $10 million. And that would enable you to maintain the 6-year bond limit and also not touch the first 2 bond limits. But otherwise, you would be able to give you a little more flexibility in 23, and we do have some room in 26. And on the cover sheet, it shows what the new bond limit schedule would be for FY21 through FY26. So that's also one strategy we employed to try to make some final fixes to this. So if you do those elements and you do the items that we're going to be talking about in a minute, staff feels we would have sufficient set-asides and the CIP would be balanced across the 6 years. And with that, I guess we'll get into the details of the reconciliation itself. Dr. Orland is going to walk through the changes, the non-Montgomery County Public Schools changes that are recommended as part of this reconciliation.
Okay, Dr. Orland.
The capital budget managers in each of the agencies to see if there's any slippage in projects that are either about to go into construction or under construction. As you probably know, all the agencies actually put together their CIP requests back last summer and early fall, and here we are in May. We're about 7 or 8, 9 months later, so things happen in between. And we always find there are some projects that slipped, and that means that we can maybe move some money out of the first year of the CIP into the second, sometimes into the third. So there are 8 such projects like that, 7 such projects like that in the under county government. The only one I want to really bring up that's has significance for a later move has to do with the South County Regional Recreation Center in Silver Spring. Originally, that was supposed to open, be finished by the spring of 2022. The latest schedule doesn't have it open until January of 2023. And that's important because the Kennedy Shriver pool renovation was going to start earlier than that. It was going to start in 2022 as well. And it's very important to the rec department that one of those 2 facilities be available for swim clubs and other aquatic activities. You can't have them both closed. So later when we talk about recreation projects, we'll see that we're recommending that the Kennedy Shriver renovation funds be deferred by 1 year. Otherwise, in terms of the reductions in the executive branch county government, first of all, in PLAR, Montgomery County Government, the council wanted to add $600,000 a year to that effort. This would only increase it by $300,000 a year, but it's still an increase, changes the 6-year total from 13.7 to $15.3 million. Secondly, the EOB HVAC renovation project would be deferred from FY23 to FY25. In the public safety area, the detention center partial demolition and renovation, a new project, was to start this summer. We're recommending it to be delayed 6 months, basically start early next calendar year, still in FY21, and the completion would still happen in fiscal year 22. The 6th District Police Station in Montgomery Village by I-270 Watkinsville Road interchange, the council wanted to accelerate that, would like to accelerate it by 1 year. However, this reconciliation would accelerate it, but only by 6 months. It would still open, however, in fiscal year 25. Another new project, the Public Safety Communications Center Phase 2, which are electrical distribution HVAC upgrades to that facility. We would delay the start of that 1 year. Design would start in FY22. The project would be completed in FY25. And finally, the Outdoor Firearms Training Center, another new project, would start not in FY23 as the executive recommended, but in FY24, completion in FY27. In transportation, the bridge renovation program, the executive recommended a 150% increase in the funding for that project from $12 million to almost $31 million. It characterizes all the renovations in that project as either being emergency, critical, or high priority. What this renovation does is keep the emergency and critical projects on the schedule that the executive is recommending. However, it defers the high priority renovations by 1 year each. Under resurfacing residential, this is the resurfacing local streets. We reduce what is in the draft CIP now by $3.5 million in FY22 and in FY23, adding back $2 million in FY25. That results in a program that would have $10 million a year for 4 years and then $12 million in the last 2 years. And that still represents an increase over the 6 years between the last CIP and this one of going from $56 million to $64 million. So it's still a larger investment. Sidewalk and curb replacement. would reduce $1 million in FY22 and $1 million in 23. However, the program would still be increased by, over the last CIP, by about $3.5 million. The White Flint Metro Station North entrance, the council has tentatively at this point recommended putting up half the funds for that project. It's about a $34 million project. In other words, programming $17 million of it, with the hope that that WMATA or the state would match that. This keeps a placeholder but reduces the size of it to 1/3. So it would program about $11.6 million instead of 17.4. The Bowie Mill Road Bikeway, a new bikeway between Olney and and near Magruder High School in Durwood, the new project would start in FY24 rather than FY23. The Capitol Crescent Trail, the tunnel, there's a lot of discussion about this. The way you've left it so far is that construction would start in the spring of 2024 and be completed in the summer of 2026. This would defer that schedule by 6 months. So the construction would start in the summer of 2024 and be finished in the late fall, early winter of 2026, still by the end of 2026. The sidewalk program minor projects would defer $1 million that you would wanted to add from FY22 and 23 into FY25 and 26. It still increases the size of the program from $16 million to $20 million over the 6 years. In facility planning transportation, 4 new studies were proposed to start in FY21. Because it's current revenue, we applied a continuity of service type of thinking to this and said we should not have those start in FY21. They're all deferred start to FY22, however. These include the Middlebrook Road, Wisteria Drive Road Diet in Germantown, the Maryland 355 Milestone to Clarksburg Road widening, mostly in Clarksburg, a study to allow the DOT to better prioritize its capital project recommendations, and ADA guideline update. Observation Drive extended. The executive had recommended delaying the start of this project by a year and stretching out the schedule for it so that it would be completed 3 years later in FY29. The council had tentatively decided no, not to delay it at all. However, this reconciliation does delay the start of it by 1 year as the executive had recommended, but it would complete it only 1 year later, not 3 years later. So you wouldn't have the stretched out schedule. It would be in the same 6-year schedule to complete it. And so it would be finished in FY27, not FY29. Intersection and spot improvements, there are a large number of improvements the executive recommended adding. These are mostly for pedestrian safety, in some cases for capacity. This reconciliation would keep the improvements that we're going to start in FY21 or 22, keep those on schedule. But the ones that we're going to start in FY23 or later would be deferred by 1 year. In the culture and recreation area, I mentioned the Kennedy Shriver Aquatic Center. That would be deferred by 1 year. Completion would be in the summer of 2025 rather than the summer of 2024. Public Arts Trust, again, we apply the continuity of services approach here because it's funded with current revenue. Our recommendation is not to add the $218,000 that was proposed for FY21. However, the $218,000 per year after that would be included in the CIP. It still represents about a doubling of the investment in that program from $1.2 million to about more than $2.2 million over the 6 years. A new program, the Recreation Facilities Refurbishment Program. This reconciliation would reduce the amount in FY24 by $3 million and add $500,000 in each in FY25 and 26. This still represents a $19 million new program that had been $21 million. And finally, in recreation, swimming pool slide replacement, another new project, would reduce the amount in FY21 through 24 by $500,000 a year. And that still results in a program of about $7.5 million over the 6-year period, as opposed to what had been hoped to be at $9.5 million. In housing and community development, the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund. This is where the executive had recommended $10 million in FY21 and $10 million in FY22. This would reduce those amounts to $8 million in FY21 and to $6 million in FY22, with the hope being that by the time we get to FY22, if prospects look a bit better in terms of our finances, we could bring that number back up to either to 8 or maybe even higher. And then final project in county government, countywide facade easements, a new study. Again, because it's funded with current revenue, we said not to add any funding, include any funding in FY21 for that program, but indeed do fund it in the later years, FY22 through 26. It's still a $2.9 million new investment compared to a little bit over $3 million. There is, I think, I believe, some money, however, in the first year for staff for that. It's $114,000. In Montgomery College, there are 2 technical adjustments similar to the technical adjustments I spoke of earlier for the county government, having to do with the Tacoma Silver Spring Math Science Center and the Germantown Student Services Center. It shifts some funds out. It does not change at all the scope or the total cost or the timing of the projects. There are 3 deferrals, however, within Montgomery College. The Capital Renewal College, Pilar College, and Roof Replacement College, which would all defer money from FY23 to FY25, $1 million, $900,000, and $500,000, respectively. Again, the 6-year totals for those programs are the same. And finally, before we turn it back over to Mr. Levchenko, the Park and Planning Commission identified 2 technical adjustments. The North Branch Trail, the production schedule actually would have that trail now completed in FY23 rather than FY21, and there are some shifts of funds within the Obed Hazen Wells Park. However, that project will still be finished by FY25. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Levchenko to talk about the schools.
Thank you, Mr. Levchenko.
Sorry about that. We're on the bottom of page 4 of the packet for those following along in the packet. First, there were some technical adjustments in the school CIP, just like there were in others, where dollars were moved, but there was no impact on the scope or timing of the projects. Next, I wanted to sort of bring the council back to where things started this cycle. And earlier in the CIP process, when the schools capital improvements program came over, and then we later got the executive's recommendation, the executive included an affordability reconciliation project as part of his CIP. And this is something that has been done in past years by past executives. And it identified a substantial gap that would need to be filled in order to accommodate his numbers within the school's request. And in response to that, the Education and Culture Chair Rice asked the school system to put together what we call a set of non-recommended reductions. This is how the school system would accommodate the executive's numbers, basically, or close to them. And I show what the schools came back with on the next page of the cover sheet, the top of page 5. I'm not going to read all those, but we will be talking about each of those in terms of the impact in reconciliation. But this non-recommended list is something the council did focus on in its full council review of the CIP last week. So as part of that, that's sort of the starting point for where we were with the council review. And at that council review, several things jumped out, but something that became a foundation for this reconciliation was the council's interest in preserving the Woodward High School reopening and the Northwood Addition facility upgrade on their approved schedules. In addition to that, Crown High School was also sought to be kept on its same schedule, and those were considered the Tier 1 restorations that the council was interested in. And then there were also some Tier 2 restorations, which I'll get into as well. And I've noted in the packet, and I think we've discussed at length, first how Woodward and Northwood are linked inextricably, because the Northwood students during the Northwood project would be housed at the Woodward facility and then move back to Northwood, and then Woodward would become a high school in its own right after that. So the schools are paired and do have to be treated in concert. Staff's recommendation does presume to keep Woodward and Northwood on schedule. So that's a foundational element of this reconciliation. However, we were unable, and this goes further down, additional changes we had to make. We were unable to meet some of these other priorities that the council had identified last week. For instance, Crown High School. In our reconciliation, it would still be deferred a year as it was in the non-recommended reductions. As a result of that, the Quince Orchard and Richard Montgomery clusters would remain in a housing moratorium as of July 1st as a result of that. Additionally, the Clarksburg Elementary School number 9 project, it's an approved project in the CIP, would also be delayed 1 year as it was in the non-recommended reductions. Similarly, the Bethesda Elementary School addition, this is a new project requested by the schools. In the non-recommended reductions, it was pushed out 2 years, and that's what's assumed in this reconciliation. In addition to that, the Watkins Mill Early Childhood Center, which was deleted in the non-recommended reductions, would be deleted in this reconciliation. The other Tier 2 item, Magruder High School Major Capital Project, this reconciliation was able to maintain that project on its approved schedule, primarily because it's already in the out years of the CIP and has actually some significant funding beyond 6 years. So it was not as big a hit in the CIP because of that timing, and we were able to accommodate it within this reconciliation. Now, doing all those things still did not get us to a balanced CIP yet. So staff had to look elsewhere. You've already heard all the other items done elsewhere in the CIP, and there were dozens of them. Well, we also had to look in the school CIP. And I've noted on page 6 of this staff report the major capital projects. The approved CIP includes a single major capital project with placeholder dollars in the CIP. The proposed CIP, as provided by the board, breaks that project into 2 separate projects, an elementary school major capital project and a secondary school major capital project. But it also replaced the placeholder dollars that were in the approved CIP with actual dollars to move forward with the schools on this list, both in the elementary and the secondary, to the tune of about $283 million more than what was in the approved CIP. So that becomes a big challenge in terms of accommodating that in the CIP. So we did look at both the elementary and the secondary. We already talked about Magruder, which is in the secondary, but going back to the elementary for a moment, there's 4 elementary schools listed in that. Southlake, Woodland, Stonegate, and Burnt Mills. What we were able to do was accommodate the Burnt Mills elementary school on its proposed schedule, primarily because of the way its expenditures were stretched out. We were able to accommodate that. But the other 3 schools, Southlake and Woodland, would be delayed 1 year, and they would open. They would now be completed in September 2024, and then Stonegate Elementary School would now be completed in January 2025. So Burnt Mills would stay on schedule, but the other 3 schools would be pushed back 1 year. Now, we would include planning dollars for the 3 deferred projects to continue in FY21. That's for 2 reasons. One, they already have spending, for the projects that already have spending occurring in them, that enables the planning work to continue without a gap. And also, to the degree there's a lot of uncertainty in the CIP this year, it's quite possible the school system may be revisiting its CIP in the fall. And theoretically, these projects could be revisited. We don't know at this time, but I think it makes sense to include the planning dollars in FY21 to provide that flexibility. That's similar to what the school system was recommending to do with some of the non-recommended reductions. So we've tried to do that here as well. On the secondary side, where you have several high schools and Neillsville Middle School, we mentioned Magruder High School earlier. There are 2 high schools that we had to push back, Damascus High School and Wooten High School. Damascus would be pushed back to a completion date of September 2026, and Wooten High School will be pushed back 1 year to September 2027. We mentioned Magruder would be on its schedule, which is actually completion in September 2027. We were able to accommodate Poolsville High School on its proposed schedule with a completion in September 2024, and we were able to include Neillsville Middle School on its proposed schedule with a completion date of September 2024. So that's where we ended up on the school side. And then another area we look at each year to help balance things is the systemic projects. And here we tried to protect the dollars as much as we could and in fact increase where we could. And we've done that in these projects, specifically the HVAC, PLR, or planned life cycle asset replacement, and roof replacement. And there is a chart on page 7 of the staff report that shows a description of the proposed spending in each of these projects, and then what we're calling the reconciliation spending. That is what would be in this reconciliation package. And in each case, the 6-year spending is higher than the proposed spending. Although the numbers are spread out. We had to accommodate the fact that we had some tight numbers in the early years, but we had some extra resources in the outer year. And so what we try to do is balance the spending over those years and add where we could to support these projects. So that's what we did on the systemic side. And so if you do all of those elements that I just mentioned in the school side, you do all the elements you heard on the non-schools projects, you make the and the annual bond assumptions for FY23 and 26 changed by the $10 million that I mentioned earlier. Then you have a balanced CIP, and as I mentioned earlier, with about $150 million in set-asides going forward, and they do sort of ramp up as you go through the CIP, and that would accommodate what we feel is a manageable process, especially given the uncertainty we have now going forward. So with all those elements, this CIP would be balanced. And I think at this time it'd be best to just take questions and try to answer any questions that council members have.
Okay, thank you. First speaker is Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much to Dr. Orlin and Mr. Levchenko. This is always a tough process, and this year seems to be a lot tougher than most. Part of the reason is because we have so many schools that not only are overcrowded, but schools that also have high levels of poverty, English speakers as second languages. And so this is one in which is challenging. Challenging in terms of acceptance, but understanding in terms of where we are with the money that we have. Certainly one in which, one of the things that troubles me most is Southlake Elementary School. Yep. We've heard from the Board of Education saying that was one of their number one priorities. And so for us to not be able to accommodate the board's number one priority is very concerning. But, the numbers fall where they fall. I truly believe at this point that instead of trying to hash over things here and there and puts here and there, I think that a discussion with our school board is warranted for them to really start to take a deeper dive in terms of what projects they really feel as though are realistic and moving forward and need to be done versus others, understanding that the system itself and construction isn't happening at the same pace as it had been before COVID-19. And so certainly from that perspective, there may be some internal revisions that the school system might want to and need to make as well when it comes to the CIP. And so from that perspective, instead of, commenting about this particular project or that particular project, I know that staff has done a number of different puts and takes and tried to move things around. And I certainly don't want to get into the game of pitting one project against another. At this point, I think it probably would be better for us to convene with our school partners, Education and Culture Committee, and talk a little bit more this fall about where we stand and what it is that we see for the future and what our strategy should be. So thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to both Mr. Levchenko and Dr. Orlin.
Thank you, and I agree with what you just said. I think that some of these, Southlake and Crown, and there's many things that are upsetting on this, but I think that we need to do what you just said. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wanted to thank all colleagues. I wanted to thank the staff. I think that this has been an incredibly challenging environment to come up with a capital improvement program, and it was tough when we started this, and it got even tougher as we got into it with all of the additional COVID-related issues, the unprecedented nature of how this process has worked, the elimination of committees. This has been a budget unlike any other. I've only been around for 2, but I hear from others that it's never been like this. And I'm really proud of what I think is a collaborative capital improvement program that reflects our priorities and our values. That certainly isn't perfect. There are projects that are delayed and aren't included that I really wanted in there. There are projects that I really felt very strongly about that made it in. And I think all of us probably feel similarly, but ultimately I think with the expert work of Dr. Orlin and Mr. Levchenko, with a lot of coordination, collaboration, and hard work that we undertook, that we have arrived at a really good place. And I feel proud of where we are, particularly given the circumstances, and I feel really good about what this council was able to do with our staff to arrive at the place that we have now come to. So look forward to approving this and moving forward and continuing our work and making sure that we don't just meet the moment that we're in, which is really what the operating budget is about, but we're prepared for the moments that follow and that we're building for the future, whether it's our schools or our transportation network or all the other aspects of our capital improvements program. And I think we've really balanced that in a terrific way and look forward to moving forward into the future with this council and for our county.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to thank the staff and everyone for their work on this. This is a tough one. Councilmember Friesen, following up on his point, we thought the budget process, we both talked over the last year about how we wanted to be more transparent and have, more time to consider things. And wow, little did I know that we would be in this situation next year with even less time. And through no fault of anyone's, because we're in a global pandemic, the ability of not having as much time to review these things. I mean, we got this memo at 10:37 last night, and I know and had conversations, and that's because Keith and Glenn probably haven't slept in 2 days working on it. So, it's tough. I'm glad Burnt Mills made it in. I'm disappointed at South Lake. To other colleagues' points, I think. These are tough decisions, and there's needs so many places. Ideally we would have had obviously more room to fit more in, but also more time to consider. But we have a great staff, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. And hopefully we won't be in this situation next year. I would agree with Councilmember Rice and President Katz that particularly on the school side, we as an E&C committee have to get together with the school board, and as they look to reprioritize based on the action we're going to take today and in the coming week. But I want to thank everybody. I think there's a lot of good things in here, some things I'm not as happy about, but it's a tough time. So I think under the circumstances, all in all, we did a good job. So I want to thank you all again and thank the president for the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. No doubt, Mr. Orlin and Mr. Levchenko, once again, you have done an amazing job in trying to fit so many needs within the constraints of the CIP budget. I will have to just want to remind us all that we've been so disciplined in terms of our spending affordability guidelines. And so it is a tough situation as we always talk about our debt service, spending affordability guidelines, the needs. It's just such a challenging thing. And, we all have particular priorities that didn't quite make it, and some others that, luckily were able to be fit in somehow. I do believe that, it'll be great to have that conversation with the school system, the Board of Education, to see what we can revisit in the fall. That would be an important conversation to have. But all in all, I think that it is so very true. It's incredible the work that we have had to just compress in a short period of time under such stressful circumstances. So kudos again to staff to Mr. Lechenko, Mr. Olin, and everybody else that has been able to put these things together under such difficult circumstances. So really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I as usual, agree with everything I've heard so far. It's well said, Chairman Rice and Councilmembers Katz and Friedson and Navarro and Jawando. Thanks so much to Keith and Glenn for the annual Wizard of Oz show, putting this all together with all the different moving parts. It's very tough. It's tougher in years where the budget is as constrained as it is this year, and you always manage to come out with a very thoughtful and well-considered solution that doesn't make everybody perfectly happy, but makes a lot of people quite happy, and is absolutely the best and most creative solution that's that's out there. It's frustrating to do this work in the kind of constrained budget that we have. But having said that, I'd rather be in our shoes than in so many other counties. We have a very desirable school system. We have a surging enrollment, and we have significant money to invest in it. And that's better than most places in the entire United States. I'm very pleased that you were able to keep Burnt Mills Elementary on schedule, which I visit every year, and I have to apologize to those parents and many of the students about why they have continued to get delayed. So I didn't really want to have to make that apology again this year. And I'm glad Neelsville could move ahead without delay, which I know also has severe needs, and very glad Magruder and Poolsville could move ahead as well. But having said that, I'm very disappointed about South Lake and Woodland and the Watkins Mill Literacy Center as well. I'm glad the chairman mentioned the need to address poverty in the school CIP. District 5 has many of the highest poverty schools in the county, and yet we have, over the last 10 years, received less than half of the CIP funding than other areas of the county. And that's something that, I know we say we don't believe in, and I am glad that this CIP restores some balance, and I think we need to keep an eye on that, because that's not something we've always tracked in the past, but it's something we need to if we're going to be consistent with our rhetoric and our values. It's always hard to find the funding in the MCPS CIP, especially under these circumstances, because the county executive recommended a lot of cuts in the front years. And while we were all counting on the Build to Learn Act funding starting very soon, it's very frustrating that we're faced with the governor's veto of the Build to Learn Act, and the fact that even when our delegation and the rest of the assembly overrides that, the funding will be provide more relief for the back end of this CIP and not the front end when we really need it. I do say this every year, that this is primarily a state responsibility. And I think a lot of people in our county don't know that and lose sight of that, don't know that it's in the state constitution as a state responsibility, and that we've continually been underfunded both in the operating and the capital budget by the state. And I'm very grateful, I know we all are, to the heroic actions of the General Assembly majority and the leadership that they, from our delegation in particular, that got the Kerwin bill and the Build to Learn Act passed. And it's a real shame the governor, chose to kick Maryland when it's down and veto that bill, those bills. But I'm looking forward to that funding being restored in the future. The CIP will have to be, revisited, I think, in the fall, and I'm looking forward to that when we know more what how our revenue picture appears. But it's as difficult as this can be, it's great working with all of you, and in particular Keith and Glenn for putting all this together. And I'm glad it makes a lot of moves in the right direction under very difficult circumstances. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Raymer.
Thanks. Not much to add. I mean, it's always hard when you're in the moment of seeing how the trade-offs come together. Thank you to all the staff and all the agencies and departments. It's always going to be a work in progress, but it's an incredible effort to put all this together, and I think it's generally a very reasonable outcome. So there certainly are moments, are points in here that I'm really pleased about. We'll get into those later, but I guess for the moment, thank you to the staff. I think there's a big improvement on this budget. It is a much better capital budget than what we started with. I think that certainly is worth acknowledging. And again, thanks to everyone for their participation.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think given all of those factors, it really was a remarkable effort to try and fit this jigsaw puzzle together. I will note that during the last recession, the cost of construction went significantly down. And so that's something we'll all have to keep a close eye on. And maybe if that happens again, then we will be in a better position to revisit some of these decisions and try to further fit more projects in if the cost of construction goes down for other projects. So obviously that's remains to be seen, but I appreciate all the efforts to date and the opportunity to speak with you guys last week when you presented this, which gave the perfect opportunity to ask questions. I thought that was a good part of this process. Thank you both.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Real quickly, I'll add to the chorus of thank you to Dr. Orlin and Mr. Lubchenco. And going through this process, I think the word that we've all hit upon, whether or not we've said it, is balance. In our 500 square mile jurisdiction with more than 1.1 million people, we're trying to do right by everybody. And while we didn't get everything that everybody wants, that's, I think, the definition of balance. And this, as has been noted, moves us closer towards our goals of equity, making sure that we do note the communities in need and how long they have been in need. And so I most appreciate that. And thank you again.
Thank you. We need a motion for the straw vote for the resolution, please. Who actually said that?
Andrew.
That was Councilmember Friedson and seconded by Vice President Hooker. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Okay. Moving right along is the next item is 8A. This was 8, what we just did. 8A, which is F21, the FY21 PAYGO, and that's also Mr. Lubchenco and Dr. Orlin.
Why don't I start on this one, Keith? A little background. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Wasn't sure. A little bit of background. We've had a policy since the last recession to put in 10% in PAYGO, which is cash, which could be for projects that are bond eligible. 10% of whatever the spending affordability guideline is for that year. And we follow that every year, except actually the very first year we had that policy, which I believe was either 2010 or 2011, where we basically have no PAYGO in that year because of the recession. We need the revenue for the operating budget. We've kept to it ever since. And so this budget was built on an assumption of $32 million in PAYGO for FY21 and $31 million next year, et cetera, 10% of what the bond limits are. What we said to you in the middle of April on our status report, and again our last status report a week ago, was that we would be preparing for you an option which would allow you to reduce or even eliminate PAYGO in FY21. And the reason for doing that, should you choose to do it, there's no obligation for you to do it. It's purely a choice, is to be able to create more flexibility when you take up what will undoubtedly be a savings plan in early FY21, and you may need some more resources. So what we've done is in this packet on pages 2 and 3, identified 3 tranches of reductions. This builds off the reconciliation that you just approved a couple minutes ago. And it would say that if you wanted to save, basically set aside or not have any pay-go in FY21, you would reduce everything in all three tranches. If you only wanted to reduce it by $10 million, you might just take the first tranche, $20 million, the first two tranches. Or if you want to, you could actually cherry pick, of course, as well. We just try to organize this for you. And the idea is that the first tranche are difficult cuts, but not as difficult as the second tranche and not as difficult sequentially as the third tranche. And so that's really the choice before you right now. We recommend that if you think you do need flexibility in the CIP, that you do a pay-go reduction or elimination now for a couple of reasons. First of all, once you appropriate CIP dollars, the agencies in terms of the executive branch, the county government, the county executive has that appropriation in hand, and they have control. And any savings plan requires an agreement between, say, the council and the school system for any reductions that they might make in their spending, or between the council and the college and reductions of their spending, and the same thing's true with the county executive for county government, et cetera. We would think we'd be in a better position if you took the cuts now, if you want to take any at all, and then see where you are when you have the savings plan. Let's say that's in September. We don't know when it's going to be. And at that point, make a judgment. Do we need to have this $32 million or $20 million or $10 million or not? And if you don't need it, or if you only need part of it, then you can very easily put that money right back into the agency's CIP and appropriation capital budgets by doing CIP amendments and supplemental appropriations at that time. So that's our recommendation. We don't have a recommendation for a particular cut or even whether or not you want to cut. It's really a matter of, do you want to create that flexibility for you now or not? And again, the tranches are just there to help you organize how you might think about that.
And if I could add something to Glenn's comments, fundamental to this approach is the idea that although we think it is very likely you will need to come back for an operating budget savings plan, we don't think it is going to be feasible to come back and look at the CIP. So as Glenn explained, once different departments and agencies have started on CIP projects, you can't stop them midstream in the same way you might be able to do with the operating budget. So this is kind of a safety measure to give you more flexibility if things are very bad in a few months when you go back to the operating budget. If you find they're not, it's always easy to add back. It'll be very easy to do a supplemental. Our concern is that if things are very bad and you say, gee, we wish we had scrubbed the CIP more, you probably won't be able to do that in the summer or the fall, and probably won't be able to return to the CIP for reductions until FY22. So again, this is just to provide you with a little bit more flexibility.
And if I could add one more thing, Ms. Michelson's absolutely correct. A lot of this work is actually done in the summer. So for example, HVAC replacement in schools, or particularly schools, and roof replacement in schools is typically done when the kids aren't in school. And if we assume for the time being that schools will be back in session in September, the appropriations for HVAC and roof replacement, just picking out two of them, will probably be largely spent, or most of it will be spent by the time you even get around to doing a savings plan. Same thing's true to a certain degree with resurfacing. That work, as you know, is usually done in the spring, summer, early fall. So I would suspect that a good bit of that money would be spent this summer. And if you wait for the savings plan, your ability to cut the CIP then, if you need to, will be limited.
Thank you. Mr. Levchenko, did you have anything to add?
I had nothing to add beyond what Glenn and Marlene said. I think it's just we're providing this option to the council for flexibility that they probably would not have if they waited until the fall.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Glenn and Marlene and Keith for for presenting this option to us. So I guess from my limited time of having reviewed this packet, and I know we're all so swamped. My reactions are that, I mean, first of all, we did adopt a fiscal policy of, target of the 10%. So that's one piece. For me, another piece is that I actually would have preferred if we had been presented with this opportunity or option earlier on, because then we could have decided, okay, go ahead with, the CIP reconciliation, understanding that we're going to go ahead and take this flexibility, and therefore whatever projects were included, we would have known that was going to take that into consideration versus now having, I feel, it's very hard for me to pick tranches or anything like that in real time. So that's the second issue. And I guess, the third issue is that, yeah, I think it would be most likely, if we're going to face a savings plan, the executive is going to have to send that to us. And so I don't feel like I have enough information or we have enough time to deliberate and figure out, what, which tranche and which projects and all of that with such little time. So I don't think I can support this at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate the comments by Councilmember Navarro. I agree. I am all for fiscal prudence. I think that we need to be preparing for what is likely to come, but I also think we need to be consistent, and I think we need to be methodical, and we need to be thoughtful. And this strikes me, unfortunately, as just being too quick to make this decision. There's some serious projects in here. There's trade-offs. There's big questions. We have spent a significant amount of time with very challenging circumstances to make really serious, sober, and substantive decisions on how to arrive at the CIP where it is. I think we should move forward with how we've moved forward. I think that we have approached this entire budget with a specific framework, which is we are going to do a continuity of services. We are going to hit our 10% reserves, which will prepare us to make some of the really challenging, difficult decisions we believe we are very likely to need to make when we come back, either later this summer or early in the fall. And I think that this would be a different approach. It's not a bad approach, but given the timing of where we are, given the amount of effort and deliberation that has come in, and given the consistency with every other aspect of this budget, I think we should approve the CIP as it is, and we should come back to all of these decisions moving forward, though I do appreciate the fact that the staff has provided this as an option and moved it forward as a discussion point. And so I would strongly agree with Councilmember Navarro's points as well.
Thank you, and I'm going to stick with my GO colleagues and agree with that as well. Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. Yeah, I concur with the comments that my colleagues have already shared. A lot of this does look fine. It's not that it's necessarily, but I think you would want a little time. You'd want a couple of weeks minimally to have some dialogue and work things out, hear from agencies. Maybe you'd look in other directions. I just can't really, countenance approving this without having had that opportunity for a process. So I think it's a good draft, and we did. I do want to comment again. Yesterday, day before, I asked the OMB director if they were working on a savings plan, and the clear indication was they were not. I know that some of the departments are not waiting for OMB to provide direction, and they're already thinking about it. So at least we have that leadership happening. But we do need to get a savings plan from the executive branch soon, because our whole budget, there is no write down of our revenues from COVID-19 in our entire budget. We didn't do that. So I know, comments have been made about the size of our reserve. That reserve is an illusion. It's based on the fact that we haven't yet written down our revenues. So we do need to plow into a savings plan. We need to do it soon. These recommendations are very helpful. I think they would form a sizable share of a savings plan, or at least a share. and I'm prepared to take that on. But I do think it needs some process and some dialogue and some back and forth. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we're in a tough spot here. We know that we're going to have to do some reductions and that there's going to be a cost savings plan at some point down the road. That's inevitable, undeniable. And I really do appreciate staff putting this together because we do need to start saving for our savings plan. And I understand the intent of it. It's obvious. Unfortunately, I agree with my colleagues that there hasn't been any deliberation on this. We don't have the sufficient time at 3:42 on this day when we're going to be taking at least the straw vote at some point in the next few minutes or hour. And so I don't know what that does moving forward. It puts us in a harder position. But I do genuinely appreciate staff forward thinking to the tough decisions that have to come. And unfortunately, it means it will be tougher. But at least when we make those decisions, it will be after thorough and thoughtful deliberation, which unfortunately we haven't had as of now. So thank you.
Thank you. Mary Beck wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you. I did want to say that, as Ms. Navarro noted, this is part of our policy, but it also has been an area where I think the rating agencies have seen it as a cushion that we could dip into without impacting the ratings, as long as it's part of a balanced approach to how we look at all of this. I think that Mr. Reamer is correct that this could be a very good starting point for any future discussions for savings plans. And when we work with the outside agencies, we would talk to them about if we had to get this kind of dollar reduction, what would be the best way with the least impact. And it might be a combination of cash funded projects or some of these projects, or maybe different level of efforts. I would note, I think council staff pointed out, some of these were actually increases already. So scaling them back to where they were before is consistent with continuity of operations potentially. So I think this is a very good basis. I have some of the same concern that Glenn mentioned in terms of once agencies have appropriation, that they could move forward. But I think if the communication and the conversation is clear to them that this is an area we will likely have to come back to. I think we work as partners with the agencies routinely. I don't know if resolution language would make a difference or would be legal, but I do think there are ways to look at this as an option to help us address some of the COVID financial impacts.
Thank you.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
I just want to reiterate that during this budget process, we have had to address some significant fiscal policy issues that the council had not had any opportunity to discuss. And so, when I mentioned this issue of this being another fiscal policy target that we have been proud to address, especially with the rating agencies, yes, it's very possible that the rating agencies do see this as a cushion, but the reality is that we promised that this is the target we were going to utilize. And so without having an opportunity for the council to also take a look at this and figure out how this would affect us, I personally don't feel comfortable, given that for the last 10 years, this is one of those things we point to every single time we meet with the rating agencies. So that's the point I'm trying to make, that yes, we're going through difficult times, but I think we need to be mindful and deliberate in how we address these fiscal policy changes in order for us to be able to then explain it and defend it when we need to.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to belabor what other folks have said, but certainly this is one where I continue to believe that, again, we are going to have to revisit this. Analysts at the state have just said that we're going to be short somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion at this point for the state. And so from that perspective, those kinds of numbers are incredibly troubling. when it comes to what it is that we are going to be able to afford moving forward, understanding that we get direct state transmission of budget funds that come to help us do the projects that we need to do. So I'm not sure what the future holds. And so making decisions at this point, I'd rather have a little bit more time under our belt so that we can certainly understand the lay of the land. We need to see what the federal government's going to do in response. We need to see what opening up these other states is going to do if we're going to see a bounce back of COVID-19, which would completely reshape everything. And so I think we just need to be very cautious about making more long-term decisions and long-term policy decisions and instead react to what it is now. That's the reason why when Councilmember Navarro first started talking about doing this same services or continuity of services budget some months ago, it made complete sense. That's the best way for us moving forward and not tie ourselves, even though this is one where we may have some potential money coming out of it. It's still one in which we're just not sure what those decisions should be at this point, and we don't find ourselves prepared. So from that perspective, I wouldn't support moving forward with this right now.
Thank you. We have no other speakers, but we do need a motion for the straw vote for the resolution. Who would like to make a motion?
So moved.
It's moved by Councilmember Reimers, seconded by Councilmember Navarro. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Yeah. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is the operating budget wrap-up, and that's Mrs. Michelson.
Thank you. You did see the preliminary wrap-up on Tuesday, and this is not very different from what you saw previously. This last one reflects the changes that you made on Tuesday and Wednesday. There are two technical corrections that I needed to bring to your attention. First, a decrease in the debt service for the Advanced Land Acquisition Fund of $2,600. And in addition, the budget did not properly reflect a transfer from the general fund to the interagency agreement special revenue fund for the maintenance of ball fields. This was a technical error, and in fact, the funding was actually put in the park and planning budget, but the transfer was not shown to get them there. So we are just going to have to change the transfer in the tracking, and in we actually showed $600,000 more for park and planning. We don't need to do that. I learned this morning. So the total reductions from the council is actually going to be 69.3 million rather than the 68.7 seen here. And that is the only other thing that I need to bring to your attention now. Otherwise, this reflects all your votes, and it will be the basis for our resolutions going forward. As you know, the council is scheduled to take final action a week from today.
Okay, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you again. I won't belabor the points that were made before about the challenging environment that we've been in. I think this operating budget was as challenging as anything. I think this council really deserves credit. We've talked about it quite a bit. The staff has been working around the clock, which we deeply appreciate, and council members have changed the way that we do business in a significant way, but I think that we've really done the county proud, but had to make some really tough decisions that none of us are happy about or thrilled about. There'll be more to say about this later, but I did want to make a motion based on the conversation earlier about there not being an interest to repurpose the position as proposed in this budget for the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission Director, and the administration's indication that that position is no longer being utilized or needed. I wanted to move to defund that position in the budget for a total of $179,718 and include that in the final budget resolution.
Second.
Okay. All right. So now, do I need to vote on that now, or do we do that in general? Is there anyone who wants to speak on this amendment or motion? No. Okay. All those it's been moved by Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Councilmember.
Councilmember.
Who you do? I'm sorry, I missed you, Will. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. I didn't know we were doing this now. I thought we were considering the bill next week. I guess this would make the bill.
Yeah.
This would make the bill not that vote not that important, I think. So just for, I guess this is for staff, or, the proposal here is to defund the position that was previously, that is currently in the budget.
Yeah, not to eliminate the position, just to defund the position, which is currently vacant.
That's correct.
Okay. So that would not enable that to be refilled. Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Is there anyone else who wants to speak on the motion? I'll try my best to keep my head up to watch whether someone wants to speak. Okay. It has been moved by Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Councilmember Navarro. For the motion, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? That carries unanimously as well. Opposed? Was there anybody opposed? You were opposed, Councilor Vice President Hucker? Were you opposed? Yes?
It looks like there's 2 opposes.
Yes.
Who was the other opposes?
I oppose as well.
You opposed as well. So as Councilmember Vice President Hucker and Councilmember Juando, it passes 7-2. Ms. Michelson, had you finished, or?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Councilmember Friedson, had you finished?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. I just wanted to share a word of appreciation to you, Council President Sidney Katz. This has been a very unusual budget cycle.
You think?
The one thing I love about the County Council is at the beginning of the year, you think you know what's going to happen in the rest of the year, and you don't know. Something completely different is actually going to happen. Unfortunately, this year, of course, it's a pandemic. But your work through this process has just been marvelous. Every time I ask you to speak, you text me back with you are on the list. And every time I do that, I don't know why, I'm always impressed by how quickly you respond to me.
It's called shortcuts, Councilmember.
Well, you're remarkably adept. And to be council president in such a confusing environment where the agenda seems to be changing by the minute, that's one of the hardest things, frankly, about the job, is keeping the conversation moving along. And so this has been one for the history books, no question about it. But I think you've done a terrific job, and I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. That's very kind. I actually have a few words, but perhaps if I weren't council president, maybe it wouldn't be as confusing. But anyhow, but let me just say, the Montgomery County FY21 budget will be one that is entered into the history books as both unique and troubling. Maybe uniquely troubling is a better way to sum it up. We have a legal obligation to pass a balanced budget by June 1st each year, and therefore we will conclude our budget deliberations in order to reach this goal we have. But we are not nearly finished. Our revenues are down, and the needs of our residents are greater than they have ever been. Unemployment is at record high levels. Businesses are shuttered. Many of our residents are struggling to meet their basic needs. It has taken extraordinary measures at every level of government to respond to and assist those in need. We are fortunate here to be able to provide financial assistance to so many, and we need to recognize that we can do this because we have, for so long, included strong reserves as a part of our budgeting process. The COVID-19 health crisis was unexpected, and when it gripped our nation and the world, it grasped us too. We could not have predicted the extent to which the virus would, and still is, affecting us. Our approach to this budget was unlike any other. We had a singular goal: continuity of service. In Montgomery County, we are proud of the services and amenities we provide each year. We try to improve and expand on what we can do. But not this year, not this budget, I'm actually pleased that we were able to meet our goal of continuity of services. For a while, that even seemed elusive. For the first time, we held our budget discussions as a committee of the whole, without the benefits of committee recommendations, and we did it all this via Zoom. You're on mute. Can you hear me? And please wave or raise your hand where the phrase is heard, replacing the usual. We have before us a committee recommendation, or I move to put it on the reconciliation list. The budget before us now is not the budget I or anyone else had hoped for. It is not the budget of plenty. But it is a budget we can be proud of, and it does reflect who we are and what is important to us. As we set out to do, we funded our departments so that they can continue to provide the services most necessary with a workforce that can remain employed. And as been said, we hope that our fiscal constraints will ease. But we do not know when or to what extent that may happen. As I began my remarks, I said that we are not nearly finished. I know that this budget is the very best we can do right now. And I look forward to beginning the process of re-examining every aspect of it, just as soon as we are able. I want to thank all of our residents, our unbelievable staff, and all of my colleagues for working together to accomplish all that we did. Thank you. And with that, we are going to adjourn this meeting. Now, Susan Kennedy has told us to remind us that she wants us to stay on the Zoom call because she wants us to have a note afterwards. So if everyone can please stay, but for everyone else, thank you very much. We are adjourned.